For the longest time, Obanai was the most mysterious Hashira. Everything from the bandage on his mouth to the color of his eyes, and especially the little snake fella on his shoulder. I know a lot of you love Rengoku or Giyu as your favorite Hashira, but for me, it's Obanai. He's not the typical heroic, overpowered kind of fan favorite character, but because of his backstory, everything he's been through, and how he still persists, he really grows on you. Let's start with his death. Many of you must already know that when Obanai and Mitsuri were at the end of their lives, Mitsuri had lost both of her arms, and so Obanai made sure to give her the tightest hug possible with all the strength he could muster at that moment. But did you know that there's another reason why the hug was so tight? It's because Obanai had already lost his sight in both of his eyes. That's why he used every bit of his remaining strength to hug her and feel her warmth. They finally found the strength to tell each other how they felt, but one could no longer hold and the other could no longer see. It's honestly kind of poetic how the two of them became one in death. And of course, they were buried together because it was simply not possible to break that eternal embrace. Now, this fact is already sentimental enough, but let me add one more thing that's highly speculated. You see, when the Demon Slayer Kakushis tried to separate them during the aftermath of the final battle, Kaburomaru, the ever-faithful and closest companion to Obanai, attacked them and kept them at a distance until it was decided that there's no choice but to bury the two of them together. Alright, so moving on to the second fact. What do you think happened to Kaburomaru after Obanai's death? As it turns out, Sanemi entrusted the best snake to Kanao, and she took care of him from that point onwards. This one sounds straightforward, but let's go deeper into Obanai's relationships for a second. We know that Kaburomaru is not just his best friend, but also basically the only real family he's ever had. We also know from the data books that Sanemi was the guy Obanai got along with the best, essentially his PFF. So, it's fitting that Sanemi was the one who entrusted Kaburomaru to Kanao. But what if I told you there's more to this? We know that Sanemi had a crush on Shinobu's sister that never materialized because she died fighting Doma. Well, Kaburomaru the snake adorably had a cute crush on Shinobu. This is canon, by the way. So not only did Obanai get along with Sanemi, you can also be sure that Sanemi himself was also buddies with Kaburomaru, because he knew the little snake fellow well enough to understand that he should be in the care of Shinobu's protege. We usually only get to see these characters being rude, but to be fair, there were tons of thoughtful character interactions happening all the time in the shadow of the story. At number 3, we have the fact that Obanai had developed an extreme case of gynophobia because of his tragic childhood. Now, gynophobia is the fear of women. This one is of course much more severe than the situation with Zenitsu, because Obanai couldn't even properly interact with female demon slayers. The psychological wounds on his heart because of his childhood were simply too much. This also means that he didn't find them attractive either. That's why his love for Mitsuri is so profound. She's not just the first woman he found to be beautiful, she's the only woman he ever saw as beautiful. And as for the fact at number 4, let's also talk about how his love for Mitsuri was actually love at first sight. Yes, considering his backstory, you'd think that Obanai must have gradually eased up around Mitsuri's presence before eventually falling for her. But nah, it was love at first sight. And guess what? Kaburomaru was left super confused and shocked when he sensed Obanai's reaction to Mitsuri's beauty. Being with Obanai since childhood, his snake knew all of his emotions and knew him best. But when Obanai met Mitsuri, he reacted in a way that was never before felt. He was so taken aback that the little snake started to panic and ended up biting Obanai because he wasn't sure what was going on. Alright, moving on. So Obanai doesn't eat much and can even go up to 3 days without eating anything. But you can probably guess why he has such unhealthy eating habits. It's because his mouth was slit and destroyed to the point that he has to permanently wear a bandage. He doesn't eat because it's too much of a hassle. He's also obviously very ashamed of his bodily disfigurement and would never show anyone in public. The easiest way to avoid his scars being seen is to not eat. Given that Mitsuri's absolute favorite thing to do is to eat, but Obanai can never openly enjoy his meal heartily together with her, is a tragic twist of fate. Although at number 6, we have the fact that whenever he sees Mitsuri eating and enjoying her food, he always ends up eating more than usual because he just loves her that much, and seeing her enjoy her food makes him work up his appetite too. By the way, do you want to know what Mitsuri always thought of this? In the databooks, it was mentioned that even when she took forever to finish eating, Obanai would always just sit there quietly, wait, and smile at her. In the same comment, Mitsuri also said that he's a sweet guy who writes the nicest letters and always compliments him. So yes, the innocent little lunch dates were clearly working. Bro ain't no simp, he was quietly working on his strategies. At number 7, we have the fact about why Obanai was never able to confess his love until the end. It's because even though he was rude to pretty much everyone but Mitsuri, he was always struggling with a sense of self-worth. This is kind of ironic because Obanai's internal suffering was similar to Giyu's suffering. They both thought that their deaths would be a good thing, but he hated Giyu's guts. Maybe if they ever talked to each other, they would have gotten along better? Now, going back to Obanai's internal conflict, he often felt that he was inherently evil or cursed, and this became a permanent thing that kept him from opening up to Mitsuri. He felt that she was such a joyful ray of sunshine, and being in her life would taint her. He thought there's no way he's good enough for her, as he felt cursed and disgusting himself. This is super depressing given that they both love each other dearly. Next, we have this idea that the physical and mental scars from when he was a sacrifice never healed. Not to mention, a part of him also felt guilty about trying to escape because it led to 50 deaths of his blood relatives. This makes sense when you remember the hell Obanai experienced in the first 12 years of his life. Everything from his face being slit, the PTSD from having the snake demon constantly glaring at him each night, to the guilt from the deaths of his so-called family. The conflicting survivor's guilt of causing the end of his whole clan, but also knowing it was them, his own blood-related family that put him through 12 years of trauma, was something he could never move past from. These were physical and emotional scars that never truly healed. They simply evolved into the blind devotion Obanai had for the Demon Slayer core. This is why he was able to become such a master despite being the second weakest Demon Slayer when it comes to physical strength. And then in the fight against Muzan, he exceeded every single expectation you could have had for him. At number 9, let's also talk a little about how Obanai actually thanked Tanjiro once. This was a big character moment because we all know that Obanai and Sanemi were always massive jerks to Tanjiro. Of course, we gotta take this at face value. It's just a simple gesture, but if we look at it with all the context we have, then it becomes clear that this was also the moment where Obanai had finally started feeling normal enough to thank others, to express himself to others. And finally, at number 10, we have a panel from a certain manga. It's called Tonikaku Kawaii, and it is so sweet and wholesome that the panels might just give you diabetes. It's a love story through and through, where both the main character and the main heroine love each other to death. Much like the love story of Obanai and Mitsuri after they reincarnated into the future, wouldn't you say? Well, to add to this, in chapter 137 of Tonikaku Kawaii, there's a cameo of Obanai and Mitsuri together along with the restaurant they run after marriage. It's an insanely thoughtful cameo that lets us hear what their lives must be like after being reborn in the modern world. Obanai is finally free of the scars on his heart. It's a beautiful romance, and as we learn from the volume extras, Obanai and Mitsuri must be having a hell of a good time, because they go on to have 5 cheerful children while running a restaurant together. Obanai may have seemed like an annoying prick, but in hindsight, he was never a bad person. He was preoccupied by self-sabotage and too reserved to even confess his love for the only woman his heart has ever accepted. If you didn't cry after all this, I challenge you to tell me an Obanai fact that could make me and the other commenters cry. And as if Obanai's past isn't already sad enough, here's the saddest tier list of all the other Hashira's backstories ranked.